right, my name is Schmidt. We're here with Damien Lapuyade. It's April 25th, 2023. We're at Seven Springs Vineyard. Damien, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
First question to get started is why wine?
Why wine? I think wine has always kind of been in the background of my life. You know, I was born and raised in St. Helena, California, so kind of in the heart of the Napa Valley. My father's always, I started with, I guess, more with my grandfather. My grandfather was a restaurateur who came from France and opened several restaurants with really amazing wine lists in San Francisco. And then my father was his lifetime in the restaurant industry as well throughout San Francisco and the Napa Valley. My mother spent a lot of time working for wineries in St. Helena area. She worked for Chateau Montelena for a long time, and I still remember being a kid kind of running around Chateau Montelena in the late 90s, early 2000s. And you know, some of the core memories and core smells of my childhood are the caves and the cellars and that kind of distinctive old cellar smell that you can get from those old historic places. And you know, when I was a kid, I remember around September or August, there would always be this distinctive smell that I never really like ventured too much to ask necessarily what it was, but it was like this funky smell in the valley. And I realized, you know, later in life that, it's all of the hundreds of thousands of tons of spent pumice being dumped out in the vineyards near my middle school and near my house. So it was always kind of, it was there, but truth be told, as a kid, I never really thought about it much as the wine industry. It was just so present in my life. And, you know, I went to school with kids that are like part of this dynastic family and you know, that are now running these amazing programs. And yeah, so it was always there, but I never really had much interest in it. I just thought I came from a really special, beautiful place that was, you know, I would meet people from outside California and they'd be like, no way, you're from Napa Valley, that's amazing. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's great, you know, it's really nice. But for the most part, I was just interested in running around playing sports. That's really like all I cared about as a kid. And, you know, schoolwork was secondary to sports. My parents used to like threaten to take away going to practice to get me to study and things like that. So I was in my own little world and not really too concerned about the wine industry. When I left the Napa Valley after high school to go to University of Oregon, I was kind of ready to see something different. But when I came and visited U of O, I felt like I was at home in a weird way. It was another valley. It was green. It was lush. It would rain. I always liked the seasons. You know, when I was a kid, it was a little bit more seasonal in the Napa Valley. There was a lot of rain. Seasons seemed to be more apparent. And when I came to Oregon, I fell in love with it. And you know, on that visit to the college, I knew immediately that I was going to college in Oregon somewhere. And U of O, the Pac-12 football program definitely helped. I probably should have gone to Oregon State knowing the career path that I would eventually take, but yeah, so I went to University of Oregon and I kind of floundered trying to figure out what exact path I wanted to take. And once I turned 21, visits back home to visit family over, you know, winter and holiday breaks became more of opportunities to go wine tasting and go to restaurants and enjoy wine with my family. And I would go meet friends on the patio of Alpha Omega and things like that, where it just started to become more and more apparent why that valley was so special. And I started to come back and do more tasting around the valley in Oregon, and it kind of struck me that grapes don't really grow in ugly places, it seems. You know, everywhere I've seen grapes growing, it just seems to be immensely beautiful, and that just started to really catch me. And so when I was getting ready to graduate, I was studying environmental sciences and kind of focusing on sustainable agriculture. And I had to get an internship as a kind of a capstone to complete my degree. And first thing I did was contact the local vineyard just outside Eugene at Iris Vineyards. And I reached out to Aaron and his staff there, and I was first kind of curious about working in the vineyard, and they said, well, we kind of got a full-time staff, but we're hiring right now for harvest interns. And I said, let's do it, I'm in. And that was kind of my first introduction to production. And that was very, very challenging. We had a really large harvest in 2014, was the first vintage. And I was working, because of my school and class schedule, I was working night shift for Iris. So I would, wake up 8 o'clock, go to class at 10 till about 2, and then I would head to Cottage Grove, 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. shift. Sometimes we got out a little earlier, but that harvest was so big that we had a long harvest there, and catch a couple hours of sleep and rinse and repeat. And I was working for Aaron Lieberman at that time, who was a phenomenal winemaker and just really technical and really great teacher. And I was also working for his cellar master at the time, Bruce Howard, who has since moved away and left the industry, but he was an amazing mentor to me at the time. He worked night shift with me, so we spent a lot of time together, and he came from a firefighting background and wasn't really a trained professional in wine, but he was immensely knowledgeable about pumps and hoses and how to operate machinery and how to fix machinery and how to move with a certain pace and urgency in the cellar, and how to be clean and make sure things are proper, because our duty was always to process at night and then leave the place immaculate for the next team in the morning. And that was something that we kind of found ourselves, we prided ourselves on that. And I just fell in love with it, despite the rigorous schedule and the kind of intense workload that I had at that time. I had actually just met my partner as well, who, we had been dating for 1 month before I went into harvest. So it was an intense moment in my life for sure. And I look back on it very fondly, and I think it was a pivotal moment that kind of a light bulb went off in my mind that, this is something that really catches my attention. Wine is something that I can both express myself creatively and also with this artistic sense mixed with science was really something that captured me. A lot of intuition is involved, while also being able to support your theories with science. I was always very science-minded and really enjoyed chemistry as a kid. And those are kind of the things that just captured me. And after that first harvest, I was also working at a golf course in the meantime and outside Eugene. So I was kind of back and forth, and I pestered Bruce and Aaron to, hey, I know you don't want to do that topping on Monday. You should let me come in and do that. And they, all right, come in. And I just kind of pestered them, kept at them, let me come in and work, even when you don't have to pay me. I just want to be a fly on the wall and kind of keep learning as much as I can while I work at the golf course. Whenever you need help, give me a call. I'd much rather be in the cellar with you guys. And after a while, they offered a full-time position, and I kind of transitioned into working in the cellar, still part-time at the golf course. And that was a beautiful balance. After I graduated, it was spend time in the cellar and then golf as much as I wanted. I would work the morning shift at the golf course, and I'd be off at noon, so I'd run out into the tee box with the old guys and play golf every day. I think my girlfriend was pretty sick of my routine after a while, but those are really good times. And then that just solidified my love for it, really. Once I kind of started working full-time there, I just became more and more infatuated with it. I started spending more and more of my very little income on trying to find wines that were inspirational and kind of representations of what I strive to make. And in 2017, I'll go back a little bit. In 2016, I decided that I wanted to go back to school and take UC Davis's kind of satellite program, their online 2-year course for winemaking, and kind of further my knowledge as best as I could from afar. So I took that course, and in 2017 after harvest, I began to look at traveling, and I went to Australia, to Western Australia, to Margaret River, and worked 7 months at Cape Mentelle while finishing my school. That was another challenge. I was a glutton for punishment with finishing school for some reason. So, classes were at, I think like 4 in the morning or something like that there, and I'd try and catch them if I could, and then scurry out the door to 6 a.m. to crush 1,000,000 tons of Sauv Blanc and Semillon. So, and from there on, I just knew that was going to be my life. Like, I didn't want to do anything else. So wine was kind of an interesting background music to my life to begin with, and then slowly in 2014 it just came to the forefront and just kind of serendipitously became what I was obsessed with.
So you mentioned the background music. So you didn't come into the wine industry unaware of wine, but you mentioned not really much idea of production. So tell me about that first year in production. What was interesting to you about the work of production? What was surprising to you about it? What hooked you into production?
Yeah, I was fascinated with seeing a raw product like grapes from the vineyard, like a beautiful cluster of grapes come into the cellar, and watch it transform into this totally unique beverage. Alcohol, obviously, I was a college kid at the time. I'm like, this is awesome. But there was just like some magic around the transformation process, the fermentation process, but also the energy in the building, the people that you get to spend time with. You become a family when you're that close and spend that many hours together, and struggle with dealing with bosses or dealing with, repetitive motions and fatigue and things like that, and you become really emboldened together and become more united. And the fact that we had international interns was always amazing to me. It gave me an opportunity to make friends from all over the world that we share a same interest. Like I said, I was always obsessed with sports. Like, I always wanted to be running around doing something physical, and the idea of like being able to be artistic while also being like covered head to toe in juice, and like, I don't have any qualms with like sticking my arm elbow deep into a drain trap to clean it out. Like, I just kind of grew up in the mud, and I enjoyed it. So I really liked it, because I was always like, am I going to be in like construction, or like what path am I going to find myself in when I like to do these other type of things? And I thought it was just a very beautiful way to kind of find my place and production. I'm not a great speaker or salesperson, so I just thought, this is where I like to be, in the kind of insular in the cellar, and in the back corners, scurrying up barrels and getting to watch this thing progress from a very, sweet, pretty thing like a cluster to like this really bizarre mass of funky grapes, and giving off weird aromas that you can manipulate and blow off and fix and coax out of the raw ingredients. It was just kind of enchanting to me at the time.
So before you went back to school, you were on full time for a little bit. Tell me about that transition from kind of the harvest rush to being in the winery for the rest of the year, the other months of the year. What was it like post harvest?
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock. I think like a lot of people go through, you do like 1 or 2 harvests and you're like, oh, I know how this works. Like, this is pretty easy. You put the things in the things, you push them down, it makes the wine, and put it into a barrel and put it away, right? And that's where it ends. But really you start to see the nuances of winemaking once you get past, harvest time and into the new year, really, here in the Northern Hemisphere. You start getting more into the chemistry side of things. You start getting into the stability of wine. You start getting into more of the procedures that are true winemaking, in my opinion, which are clarification and stabilization. I really think as winemakers, our jobs are to, yes, make, transition the grape to a finished wine and build texture and things like that during harvest, but really over the course of a full year, your primary job is clarify and stabilize. And I found that really interesting because it got me into the laboratory. They have a very nice laboratory in at Cottage Grove at Iris, and I spent a lot of time in there kind of figuring out some of the procedures, developing some SOPs. There's definitely a lot of cleaning and things like that. Like, I think people underestimate how dirty the job is and how much cleaning you do in winemaking. It's probably 80% cleaning a lot of times, and not as romantic as people sometimes maybe think the production side of things are. But yeah, I just found it to be enthralling, and I found that the outside of the harvest rush, there's this beautiful dichotomy in winemaking where it's like this very slow season where you're very slowly tracking things, making sure things are going in the right direction, giving it a very gentle touch, and where it can be very insular and kind of solo. And then there is this total flip side of winemaking where it is like a mad dash, all hands on deck, bunch of people in the building running around trying to do as much as they possibly can in a very short period of time. Here in Oregon we deal with rains that kind of create that final moment of harvest, so a lot of times it's working from forecasts and working it backwards. How many tons do we have to get in before the rains hit, and all the nuances and picking decisions and things like that. You start to see those after you kind of shed those first couple years of just pure harvest work, and you see that there's a lot more nuances involved in making decisions. It's not just go out and pick them when they're sweet. There's a lot more to kind of making the decisions that shape the style of wine that you want to make.
So what prompted you to go back to school, to go to the UC Davis program?
It was kind of that transition into full-time work. I was shocked at how much more there was to know. I came in at Harvest 15, my second vintage, like, oh yeah, I know the routine now. I know how to put the grapes in the press and extract it and all this. And then, full-time work became pretty apparent to me that the every door that you open in winemaking, there's a million things that you did not know about, and there's a million different doors within that door that you need to open to understand even 1/10 of what we're doing. So I felt the need to, I was hungry to continue gaining knowledge. I felt I was still young, and when I don't keep my brain busy with work or have somebody pushing me to study, I feel like I get a little stagnant. So at that time I was kind of searching for somebody to push me and give me a direction on where to go in the wine industry. It was so expansive, the amount of information out there. It was like I need to maybe hone it in first. And UC Davis I felt was a really great opportunity because they teach you how to make very commercially viable wines. So they really give you how to make very technical wines. And I felt like that was a really great place to start, how to make very clean, commercially viable wines through the UC Davis program. And then as I kind of completed that, and experiencing different cellars and different winemaking kind of theologies, I realized that there are so many different ways to make wine, and so many different ways that you can think about things, and from the vineyard to the cellar, that the foundation of having a very clean winemaking style that you can learn from UC Davis enables me to now start to broaden my approach and kind of peel back the layers that I feel maybe are unnecessary, or maybe how can I coax out more interest in a wine or more nuance in a wine by maybe removing one aspect, and that's been definitely something that I've valued here at Evening Land, especially because Sashi has so many, and Raj, they have so many contacts and friends and experiences in old world settings where they can draw from this expansive knowledge of how wines used to be made without the aid of science and technology, and how traditional wines were feral and have a lot of so-called flaws that if you asked about native fermentations at UC Davis, they might look at you funny and say, oh, what are you trying to make, or some of the greatest wines I've ever had have some level of Brettanomyces or VA in them, and it started to open my mind to kind of how can I use this core foundation that I learned at UC Davis and kind of build upon that, or remove some of the protective layers or the safety nets that you learn are so necessary, and kind of develop an idea of like what great winemaking is, maybe not clean winemaking.
It's a really interesting way to put that. I like that. We're going to come back to that in a second. I'm curious, going to UC Davis or attending the program after already having some cellar work, was there anything that struck you about what you were learning or what you were not learning in school that you thought was interesting given your experience?
Yeah, like I said, the native fermentation thing was something that I was like really interested in. A lot of the wines that I had that were really inspiring to me, I would research them, and they were spontaneously fermented, no added yeast, no added nutrients, things like that. That was eye-opening to me. You know, we inoculated almost everything, and once I became full-time at Iris and kind of took over as cellar master after I came back from Australia in 2018. I was kind of given some flexibility to kind of try some things, and Aaron was very generous to allow me to kind of, hey, I'm really interested in kind of what a native fermentation tastes like next to, you know, an inoculated one, and can we split this parcel and experiment a little bit? And he was very open to it, and it opened my eyes because I thought the wines were dramatically different. As did he. I think we all learn from experiences like that, and I value experimentation, and yeah, those are kind of the main things that stick out to me at that time, because again, I was still kind of learning, and everything I learned from UC Davis was like, okay, this is the way to do it. And then after I graduated and I was more exposed to different ideas and different winemaking techniques, I realized, well, there's not just one way, and there's many ways that you can achieve different goals and different levels of wine quality.
So tell us about the experience in Australia. You mentioned obviously doing it while you were still finishing school, which was a fun challenge. Tell me about the winemaking style, the atmosphere, the place compared to what you knew before.
Yeah, Margaret River is an amazing place. It is like only a few miles from the ocean, so it's very moderated by the Indian Ocean and the Southern Ocean, and the wines from there are exceptional. It was my first kind of introduction to making Bordeaux varietals. Funny enough, I've never worked a harvest in Napa Valley. I've kind of always just been in love with Oregon and stuck with it, and I love Pinot and Chardonnay especially, and I love the farming and agriculture here, so I always stuck to that. So I had never really worked with Bordeaux varietals. So when I went to Australia, that was a new venture for me, but Chardonnay I was fairly familiar with. We made some Chardonnay at Iris, and it was always one of my favorite projects. And the Chardonnay in Margaret River is exceptional. I was blown away at the quality of Chardonnay there. The Bordeaux varietals, I worked for Cape Mentelle, which is owned by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, and you know, it's funny, I was expecting to go and work with Australians, so I had an intern in 2016 who lived in Margaret River, and he was always telling me, you gotta come out, you gotta come out, you gotta come out. So in 18, I was like, or you know, late 17, I called him and I was like, hey, I think I'm ready to come out there. Where should I work? Do you have any friends? And he said, I'm actually changing jobs right now, so you're gonna have to figure out where to work, but me and my wife just bought a new house, and there's a kind of self-contained unit in the back, so bring your partner, come move out here, and we'll set you up with a place to live. I said, well, that's the hard part, so I can find somewhere to work. So I just started writing letters to, I went on like James Holliday's like top 100 list of the best wineries in Western Australia, and I just picked out the names that were doing things that I was interested in, and I started trying to find and track down their emails as best as I possibly could, and wrote individual cover letters to each of them and just sent my resume saying I really would love to come work for you, and if there's any space on your team for me, I would love to join you. And I got a few back, but Cape Mentelle stuck out to me because they have a really rich history. And because they're owned by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, they actually have a ton of different holdings, right? So, and they're known for moving their winemakers around. And if you've worked for one LVMH property, they will happily send you to the next one for the next harvest if you have a good experience. So I was interested in maybe going to their Chandon in the Andes, or even working in Napa. I wasn't opposed to it, but they have a couple places in, they have Bodega Numancia in Spain I was interested in, and a lot of really cool places that were possible. And so I thought, and we sold off everything to go to Australia. We were like, let's get rid of all of our furniture, let's go travel. Like that was kind of the plan. And the harvest was very long. It was about 5 months of harvesting, and then they kept me on board because I was just like, I have a great place to live. We have nowhere to be. If you guys need help, like, keep me on. And they kept me on for a couple months. I took a holiday to go to Bali, which is like it's like a short plane ride from Western Australia. It's super easy and gorgeous. So we took off to go to Bali, and while I was in the jungle of Bali, I got a call from Aaron Lieberman. I'm like, on a crackly line, like hearing Aaron, and he's like, hey, Bruce is taking off. He's going to move out of the valley, and we're looking for a new cellar master. Would you be interested? And I was like, so thrown off at the time, because I was like, where am I right now, let alone talking about coming back to the Willamette Valley, which we just left and kind of had no plans on returning to. And my partner and I kind of talked about it for a while, and I asked him to take a week or so to enjoy Bali and really not think about it too much. And he said yeah, and I reached back out, and after we discussed it, we kind of decided, I could pinball around and stay kind of on the bottom rung as a harvest intern for, who knows, a couple years before I find a solid gig, or we determine where we want to be, or I could go back and kind of take that next step up the ladder and start my progression up and see a different side of the business and be more leaned on for sales and marketing and things of that sort. So after a while, I actually had an interview with them on Zoom, and I was like, there was like pigs and like kookaburras and all sorts of crazy animals going on around me in this jungled Airbnb we were staying at, and it was a bizarre experience, but ended up deciding to head back. And within we actually ended up we had a plane flight scheduled for 2 weeks after we got back, and we ended up getting the volcano exploded while we were there the day before we were supposed to fly out, so they canceled all flights for like 4 days. So we were kind of just hanging out in Bali on the beach waiting for them to tell us we could go, and we were like getting concerned that it might be a while and we might miss our flight back, and ended up making it back and immediately kind of went into harvest prep for Iris for vintage 18, and it was kind of a bang process. But yeah, the winemaking in Australia, sorry, large tangent there, but the winemaking in Australia was really eye-opening. Very different from Pinot Noir, obviously, with the Bordeaux varietals. The winemaker who was in charge there at the time had just come from Newton Vineyards in Napa Valley in St. Helena, which I was very familiar with from my childhood. It was right up the road from my house. And she was employing very much Napa winemaking style. So we were picking very late. Fruit would come in and we would, extended macerate them for 70 days. And so it was a very long harvest and many tanks. So most of my days there were either dumping Sauv Blanc and Semillon into a destemmer and pushing it to, pressing it, or it was spent doing pump overs, which was basically start on one end, do the pump over. By the time you get to the end, go back to number one and start the pump overs all over again. And that was a 12-hour shift. So it was a lot of hyper extraction and very different winemaking than I was experienced to in the Willamette Valley with Pinot Noir. After that experience, I was not as interested in working with Bordeaux varietals. Not because there's anything wrong with working with Bordeaux varietals. I love Bordeaux, but I felt that the wines are really difficult early. And I found that I was more interested in elegance and softer texture and balance, and I felt that the wines were very difficult to envision early in their life cycle. It was going to take many, many, many years, and I had many bottles of old Cape Mentel that were phenomenal. But the early bottlings, 2017, 16, 15, were just so powerful, and I just didn't find much elegance or enjoyment out of them until they had many years in bottle to age. So I was kind of immediately like, I want to make something that's like approachable and friendly and elegant and has this really beautiful balance of power but elegance and this lithe texture that I found in the Willamette Valley. So that definitely played into making the decision to come back to Oregon.
And you mentioned coming back to Oregon and kind of starting to climb the ladder, taking that kind of full-time role. So tell me what that was like. What was that first harvest, first year like on a full-time role and having a kind of a continual role in the cellar?
Yeah, it was different because it very quickly became just like doing my work to becoming a manager, and that's a tricky transition, especially when you're used to just kind of being the go man, like go. Like you have to pull the reins at that point and say, well, I need to delegate. And that was a struggle in that first vintage for me, to kind of find my footing and my voice as a manager and not one of the interns. And I think I still struggle with it, honestly. I still like to do the work a lot of the times, and I hope to never really get away from that. Like I don't envision being in a winery that grows too big, because I enjoy doing the work and being very hands-on. I like smelling the ferments. I like topping. I like doing the small things. I find enjoyment in those things. So at that time, that was kind of tricky for me to understand that my job was now delegation more than it was actually doing the work. But with that, you learn a new skill set, and you actually have an opportunity to, rather than doing the punch down on every fermenter, you can actually go through and taste every fermenter and make decisions on extraction and things like that maybe are more important to actually crafting a wine and developing the textural nuances in a wine. So that was kind of the main takeaway that I started to gain in 2018.
So what came next?
So worked 2019 as cellar master at Iris as well, and kind of my partner was doing sales for Iris as well, and we had we had at that point spent 10 years in Eugene between going through college and graduating and working, and she was finishing school those last couple years that I was, those first couple years I was at Iris, and she had since finished and was trying to find what she wanted to do in Australia. She found that she really loved the wine industry as well. She started working at the cellar doors in Margaret River and found her footing in sales, and came back to Eugene and felt that it was, maybe the regional sales wasn't her favorite part of the industry, and we started to think about moving north and being a little bit more in the heart of the Willamette Valley, being around a younger crowd of winemakers. The winemaking community, there is a great community down in Eugene, but it's maybe a little bit older and spread out. There's not as many people flocking there from around the world to actually be steeped in the Willamette Valley culture. So we started thinking about it, and at that time, we were hungry for something else, and so Iris, that ran its course, and a lot of great times there, and we just decided that it was time to move to McMinnville, and kind of so we moved in January of 2020. My partner actually got a job through our mutual friend who she met at King Estate, AJ McCafferty, who's the hospitality manager here, and she reached out to AJ and was like, hey, I know you're running the tasting room, do you have any jobs available? And he said, yeah, I would love to work with you, and hired her on, and we moved up and I kind of left Iris and planned on figuring it out. There's plenty of wineries up here. I'll go get a job. Like, I just want to learn something and keep evolving my kind of exposure to different techniques. And it just so happens, and then March comes around. I was working at the winemaker studio, kind of helping out a little bit and just trying to meet people and give a hand here and there. And but it wasn't anything permanent. And then March came around and COVID hit, and I was like, oh boy, what did I do? Where am I gonna end up now? Like, who's hiring more people on right now? So that was a very worrisome time. And then about, 15 days into that, I was like 15 days of sitting on my couch, stuck at home, like stay-at-home order, and I get a call from John Faulkner, who was the assistant, well, he was the director of winemaking operations for Provenage, so the kind of umbrella company that runs Evening Land, Domaine de la Côte, Sandy, and Pietrasassi. And he said, AJ told me that you're looking for a position, a winemaking position, and we have a potential job opening at Evening Land. Would you be interested? And I was like, absolutely. Like, I moved up here having tasted with AJ, and I was blown away by the Chardonnay. Like, it was an eye-opening experience. I had some phenomenal Chardonnays that were reminiscent in Margaret River from some of the producers there. And when I came here, I was like, whoa, we're doing this here too. Like, people are doing this here. I was blown away, and I was infatuated with it. And then, I still remember sitting on the forklift at Iris, moving stacks of barrels, listening to Sashi on an interview. I forget what podcast, but some podcast interview, and he's talking about, pied de couves and all these old school techniques that he employs, and I was just like blown away, like, a pied de couve, that is so genius, like a natural starter culture. Like, why have I never heard of this before? Why did UC Davis never tell me about this? Like, what is this secret magic people have? And so when I got that call, I was like, yes, absolutely. Like, when do you want to meet? And I met with him a couple times, went through several interviews, and then Sashi called me and met me at the tasting room for the final interview. And actually, oddly enough, it was the same day that they had to furlough the tasting room staff. So, like, on one hand, I was getting a job, and on the other hand, my partner was being laid off for a temporary period of time. So it was very bittersweet, but she was happy. It was getting scary, and she was fine with it. She's like, it's temporary. We'll come out of this after a couple of weeks, and you'll have a job, and I'll have a job. It'll work out. And meantime, I get to stay home for a couple of weeks, so, like, no big deal. So that's kind of how it began with it was very serendipitous, and, like, kind of, it's about who you know type thing. I was in the right place at the right time, and couldn't be happier.
So tell me about the role as it was sort of just defined for you in the interview process. What were you going to be coming in to do, and how has that sort of evolved since you got here?
It was kind of undefined at the time of the interviews. It was kind of an assistant winemaker or an associate winemaker, or it was kind of unclear. I was kind of actually confused by myself. But it turns out that over that period of time that we were interviewing, they were making a transition from their previous winemaker, and they were looking for a new winemaker to come in. So I kind of came on board as an associate winemaker that reported to my boss, the director of winemaking down in California. And but it was completely solo, which was a bit shocking. At first, I was like, boy, am I ready for this? Like, I didn't think I was interviewing for this. I didn't know what it was going to be this. I didn't know I was going to be working like 100% solo. Like, it was the middle of COVID, so it kind of worked out. But at the same time, like, I would go like 2 weeks, and the only person I would see was like the FedEx guy, and we'd just like wave at each other. So it was like a very bizarre stretch there. And but I loved it. Like I said, I've always enjoyed the kind of quiet serenity of the cellar, and I enjoy kind of just putting a headphone in, listening to music or listening to a podcast and doing my thing and working and, climbing barrels. And I found it very peaceful, and I really enjoyed it. And it being COVID anyways, it was like I'm in about as safe of a place as I can be. And then, Harvest 2020 came around, which was a bizarre experience in itself, but there's actually over by Bjornson, there's a large mansion that used to be an Airbnb. It's recently sold, but it used to be an Airbnb, and it used to be incredibly affordable. I don't know, it was kind of a weird setup there, but it used to be really cheap. So Sashi had rented that whole thing out for 2020 to bubble the entire team, and the whole winemaking team, including Sashi, and it was only a team of 3, bubbled up, and forest fires hit, and we were in that mansion. And I mean, it was amazing and bizarre and devastating. I mean, so many emotions. It was like we just needed something to be excited about with everything going on in the world. And then, I remember sitting here on that Sunday with family, and we were looking off in the distance over by Mount Jefferson, and you just see this mushroom cloud of smoke. We're like, wow, that looks big. That's pretty crazy. Didn't think much of it. Next day was the holiday, and we go out to Hood River. We like to go out to Hood River, and we visited High U Wine Farm and went and had pizza at the little White Salmon bakery there. It's an amazing little place, and it was filled with smoke. As we were going into Hood River, we were just hitting this wall of smoke, and then as we left that night, it was we were staying in the smoke. The smoke was not staying behind in Hood River. And by the time we got back to our house, where we had left windows open, our house was completely filled with smoke. We shut everything down, and I mean, that next morning was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. It felt like an apocalypse. I was driving through Amity, and it was just a wall of black and orange. I mean, I still have pictures of looking out the cellar roll up, and it was completely orange, like a pumpkin orange, bright orange. And it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I didn't know what was going on, what was happening. Everything felt apocalyptic already with COVID and everything like that. And it was just a bizarre scene. And then shortly after that, we realized the trouble we were in with the impact in the vineyard. And that dramatically changed the course of harvest, that dramatically changed how we had to think about everything. So it was kind of 2020 is an interesting year to think about.
It's a nice way to put it, I guess. Interesting to think about, yes.
Yeah.
So with that, after kind of all the solitary work and all the sort of preparation for this harvest, what did you kind of salvage from it, and what was sort of the plan going forward? Yeah,
we are fortunate to have a lot of kind of friends. Sashi and Raj especially have a lot of friends around the Napa Valley, Australia, that have been dealing with bushfires and forest fires in the past. And Ted Lemon from Literati had sent an email to some people. I think a lot of people have heard about this message, but it was essentially saying, don't be too hopeful. If you can see it in the vineyards, and it's sitting in it for, at a certain, AQI for too long, thinking that you can go about things as normal is your worst enemy at this point. You need to take proactive, measures for it. And Sashi sent that to me, and he literally told me, read this every morning before you wake up, because hope is your worst enemy at this point. And it was, a lot of people in the valley took a lot of offense to it. Who's this guy think he is? Kind of how dare you tell us not to have hope? That's a hard thing to hear, especially in 2020, where hope was everything. But it was not a malicious message. It was a good warning, I think, and we took it to heart. And we picked the vineyard as best as we possibly could while keeping our vineyard staff safe. The conditions were not okay for pickers to be working. So when we found windows that felt okay, or the AQI dropped, or if we could get respirators for the staff and they were willing, they want to pick and see all their hard work come into the vineyard as well, or into the cellar as well. So they were eager to pick out here as well. So when we found openings too, we tried to pull in as much as we could. We had picked a small amount of Pinot the first day in the smoke, and fermented that on the skins to try and promote color. And then a lot of the rest of the Pinot Noir that we brought in went straight into the press and separated the skins from the juice immediately. We were lucky to have that small amount of skin contacted, actually red wine, because that helped color up our main cuvee that we ended up putting together. But yeah, it was a very light, not quite red wine, not quite rosé wine that we made, but it was incredibly vibrant and fresh and textured. And we had a lot of resources that kind of helped us navigate those waters for those 9-10 days that we were just stuck in smoke trying to figure out what we were working with. I think Chardonnay fared much better. I've had some really stunning 2020 Chardonnays, even from Seven Springs, from people like Seth Morgan Long and Andrew Rikers, and there's some really great expressions of Chardonnay. I think we learned a lot about what varietals are more susceptible. I think our Gamay fared pretty well. We were definitely lighter with the extraction time, but Gamay and Chardonnay seemed to fare better, and Pinot seemed to absorb it all. It just seems to be really, really reactive with the smoke compounds. It was a vintage of, it's weird to say, but like the most technical winemaking I've ever had to do, because we were trialing a lot of things. We were, testing products. We were figuring out on the fly how to make wine. It was like we never made wine before, kind of like every day we woke up like, all right, what are we doing? We'd be pressing juice or being like, what are we even making with this at sometimes? But we were able to develop a vision after we started tasting some of the components, and I think we were able to make some very compelling wines, but we were very proactive in saying, let's get this on the market immediately. Let's get this into our consumers' hands. This is a fun, fresh thing that everybody should drink during the summer, and don't plan on cellaring it. I've had a few bottles recently of that wine, and it's still very, very aromatic and textured, and it's a really nice wine. I'm very proud of that wine because of the difficulties and kind of the intense winemaking that had to go into it. And it's just kind of a reminder of a really difficult time, and I think that's a beautiful thing about wine, is that like it takes you back to a time and place, good or bad. I think there's a lot of people seek out bottles of wine from the World War II and the 40s and prize those wines. It's a terrible time to have lived through, but it's an amazing time capsule of like what was going on, and I think wine is incredibly valuable in that way.
So tell me about that kind of initial process for you of figuring out what you were doing and how you were going to do it. Did you feel like you were ready for it in the end? Yeah,
I mean, I don't think there was any choice at that point. I was like, I'm ready. Like I was telling Sashi and John, like, I'm ready. Let's do this. Like, and then I go home and be like, I don't know if I'm ready for this, but I think as I take day by day, I was like, I know how to do these things. Like this, it's nothing new. There's new techniques, but I can conceptualize them. I've studied some of these things before. Like I said, I've listened to a lot of podcasts with Sashi, so I kind of knew his ideas and what he was about. And John Faulkner was an amazing resource for me. He was a great mentor. He was very patient and an incredible teacher. So I had a lot, although they weren't in the building with me, I had a great support system and a great team down south. And a very cool part of working for Provenage is we travel. So despite 2020 being a difficult vintage to travel, I drove down to California to the Lompoc cellar to Domaine de la Côte and worked harvest with them. And because of how the timing of harvest lines up, I can usually go down and work 1 or 2 weeks of harvest leading into our harvest up here. So I think that is an amazing thing to be able to do because it allows me to actually work 2 harvests in 1 year while staying in the same hemisphere, which is pretty unique. It also helps me, like, you know, I think every winemaker kind of deals with that first week of harvest where you're like kind of the first fruit comes in and you kind of go through this period of like, well, do I remember how to do this? Like, what are the calculations? Like trying to remember how things go, and then it kind of just goes back on the autopilot, you know? So going down there and working more as like an intern, like, you guys need an extra set of hands, like let me just jump in, meet the team, and kind of develop a rapport with them. Like I will usually just crash, you know, where the interns are crashing too, just to like become friendly with those guys and gals and just start to develop a team camaraderie. It's an amazing thing to be able to do because, one, it gets my feet wet, it gets me thinking back in harvest mode. So when I come back up here, I'm like ready to go. Like that fruit needs to come in now. Like let's start doing this. And then also we share interns. So because of how the harvests lay out, oftentimes they have an abundance of staff down there that are able to send a couple up to me once I start harvesting up here, and then once things start slowing down up there and we really start picking up here, they can send the full intern staff. So with that, me being able to go down there and develop this rapport, when they come up, we already know each other. We've already worked together. We've already kind of figured each other out and kind of know what we're expecting from each other, which is really amazing. We didn't have any internationals, which is always a bummer in 2020 and 2021. But we had a lot of people from all over the United States, from Virginia and Michigan and some different places. So it's a very fun experience.
As you've been here, tell me about getting to know the place, the vineyard, the site here, as well as sort of getting to know the process. You mentioned some kind of same process with some new techniques. So tell me about getting used to that and kind of finding your way here.
Yeah, the vineyard is, I mean, just an amazing place. I'm blessed every day to just be a small part of this place and the history of this place. It kind of blows my mind. Like I said, at this jump, I was like, am I ready to be a winemaker solo, let alone of this place? Like, this is not, it was an intense moment. And yeah, I mean, days like this, you come out here and you walk around, and today's kind of a joyous day. We're seeing first signs of buds emerging from the vines, and it's just a really amazing place. And then you taste the wines as they develop and the fruit that comes in, and it's awe-inspiring how special it is. You know, even outside the vineyard, there's 200 some odd acres here that are owned by the company that are all forested, and you wander back into there's an amazing waterfall that you can walk down to at the bottom of the hill here. It's an amazingly diverse and special place. There's birds, there's animals, there's bobcats that come out here late at night, and there's elk that roam and burst through fences up at the top of the hill, you know, early in the morning. And there's been sightings of bears down at the bottom and kind of that little low area down there. So it's a very special place. I mean, the mountains, you can feel the energy from these mountains. I mean, Mount Hood is showing off right now. And yeah, it's an extremely dynamic place that is just, I couldn't be happier to work with a place like this. As far as technique in the cellar, yeah, I mean, Sashi and Raj are like, they're amazing in how they think. They have like this ability to see into the future and taste things that are so raw and young and be able to forecast where they're going. So just being a fly on the wall for that and kind of working with them to develop my own ability to do those type of things is you know, priceless. Technique wise, I think there's a lot of interesting things that they take from old world techniques. Sashi is very much a traditionalist and likes to do things the way that they used to be done. And so I've learned a lot of different techniques. I mean, Chardonnay especially is like one thing that, you know, I've been able to hone my craft with and learn a lot from John and Sashi and Raj on that. And then Pinot Noir, you know, they're at Domaine de la Côte, they're very, very heavy on whole cluster. It's been a progression here. I think in the early days in 2014, when they purchased Evening Land, they were like, we do whole cluster, that's what we're going to do, and that they used a lot of whole cluster. But they're very fluid. They know how to taste wine. They know how to forecast where wines are going and what the market wants, and they've evolved their mindset on that quite a bit. Just understanding this vineyard and understanding how the wines progress, and have pulled back quite a bit on whole cluster inclusion. On great vintages, we'll use 33%, like 21. Seemed like a good percentage. And then in 2022, because things were maybe not as phenolically ripe as we would be looking for, and maybe, you know, green seeds, very green sappy stems, we opted to use nearly 0% whole cluster. And that's a very far cry from their original mindset with Domaine de la Côte. And so it's just a testament to how fluid they are and how they can, you know, they stay nimble. They see what's working and what's not working. They understand that it's a new vineyard to them, and they've been amazing to work with, because it's just kind of watching them figure it out and being there to kind of help guide that vision for them.
Well, it kind of brings to mind a kind of an interesting question you alluded to earlier. So you obviously have Raj and Sashi, you have these people with this vision and with this experience and with all of these different places. So where does sort of your personal sort of style vision fit in, since you're the one kind of on the ground here every day, sort of guiding the vines and guiding the wines?
It was kind of the through line that I felt when I knew I would love to work for Evening Land. I just didn't know that the opportunity would ever show, because I felt like they were making wines that were similar to my style and my palate. I want to make, you know, my heart lies with wines that have immense amount of energy, freshness, elegance, have that kind of effortless power, which I think Pinot can be. And I know when I got into the cellar with Sashi and started really talking about how we're going to envision making these wines going forward, we were in lockstep with that. And that was a special moment. That was like, from top to bottom, every cuvee matters. And the goal is, you know, some of the techniques that we employ now are very unique. We use a lot of infusion for some of our wines, which means no cap manipulation at all. It is purely steeping skins in the juice without actually actively extracting. Because this site can be very tannic. The Van Duzer corridor's direct correlation with the Eola Amity Hills and Seven Springs means we get a lot of wind, and the wind can thicken up the skins quite a bit. And we found that some vintages, right vintages, get really tannic and can be really overpowering at times. And in a pursuit of more elegance and finesse, we've pulled back, and we've tried to find methods to pull back on extraction, which, I mean, I was like all for. I thought that was amazing, and I've had a lot of really, I mean, no disparagement or no offense to any wines being made in the valley, but there's a lot that are very extracted or very dark and very, very powerful wines, and I've always been more drawn to the ones that are more lithe and elegant and fresh, and preserving kind of that earlier pick, and that preserving that freshness that makes you want to take another sip and another sip, that keeps the mouth salivating, that keeps your palate engaged, and pairs with any food really that you can come up with. So yeah.
So earlier on you described sort of your job as a winemaker boiling down to clarification and stabilization. I think that's interesting. So tell me about coming to that understanding and what you feel are sort of the key ways in which you do that on an annual basis.
Yeah, so I think that's been an evolution, kind of. Obviously, there is more to winemaking, right? That's a very simplified way of explaining it. But during harvest, we kind of, we talk about it quite a bit with Sashi and Raj. It's Pinot Noir seems to be made at harvest. Like, you're building texture and you're building the wine that you desire to age. Chardonnay is kind of the opposite. You kind of process the fruit and you extract the fruit. There's many techniques to doing that, but ultimately you're trying to just separate the juice. We find that Chardonnay comes in the finishing. What's really special about Chardonnay is that in the aging and the finishing. That is the kind of the final touches on making your blend, whether that's fining, filtering, sulfur usage, the amount of lees that you keep in barrel, whether it stays in wood, whether it stays in or gets moved to stainless steel, how you're building textures over that élevage and how you're finishing the wine before it goes into bottle seems to make the most difference in Chardonnay, in my opinion, in our opinion. Whereas Pinot Noir is definitely more built in the fermenter, and then you kind of try to maintain the freshness and the vibrancy through the aging so that you can get this delicate, long chains of tannins that kind of are pleasing to the palate, and it becomes more harmonious. Techniques that we use for clarification and preserving freshness, I think, are key to what we do, which is cold cellar temperatures and long élevage for the most part. We do something. We do a little bit of extended maceration, but not because we're using this infusion technique where we're not actively extracting. We can get away with a little bit more extended maceration, and that extended maceration is not actually to continue to build texture. It is to allow for clarification in the tank itself. So when we separate the free run and decouvage the tank for pressing, we get very clear, elegant wine already, and which means that and then we put it in a tank, allow it to settle for a little while before going to barrel, which gives us very clear, fresh wine, which means we're not getting a lot of reductive characters or overly building these off aromas that we're not quite interested in, that can kind of cloud that feeling of vibrancy and freshness. And with that, we get cold cellar temperatures, which and I work fairly hard to preserve natural CO2. Cold temperatures allow that to happen as well. So preserving the natural CO2 in suspension with the wine gives us both a protecting agent, which allows us to use less sulfur, but also just gives it this freshness, and when we drive off that CO2 at the very last minute, it preserves that freshness and kind of gives it this really elegant, pretty aromatics. And it may slow down the aging a little bit, being in such a CO2 rich environment, but we feel that that's beneficial to preserving those bright, fresh aromatics and preserving the energy.
So tell me about sort of future then here. Obviously, you've been here a few years now. You've actually had a couple of non-2020 harvests now to get an idea for what the potential is here. So as you're looking ahead for your work here, what comes next? Are there things you're looking to try that are different, or is it more of a kind of a narrowing in on what you've already done?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think as you know, I kind of spoke to it earlier, like when I was just starting the journey, I was like opening doors, and like you realize there's 10 doors inside that door that you need to open, and that still continues today. Like every time I open a book and start doing research on one particular thing, it's like another thing pops up and I'm like, well, what's that? And I need to open that door, and it just becomes this kind of rabbit hole effect. And I think I'm always trying to stay hungry for knowledge and for technique, and there's always people pushing the boundaries and trying to develop new techniques and different ways of thinking about things, whether that's in the vineyard or in the cellar. So I think it is the future is in refining what we're currently doing, but also staying nimble and staying on top of what other people are doing and trying to learn from our peers and learn from the other people around the valley or around the world that are doing things that maybe we could employ ourselves. I think Seven Springs will probably, we've planted 17 new acres this last winter, and we'll be growing. So we will be producing more Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. No plans at the moment to plant other varietals, although we've had some discussions about it. I think white varietals have a tremendous amount of potential here in the Willamette Valley. The growing season seems to be really perfect to retaining freshness, but also getting us the phenolically ripe. We're also planting in between several of the new parcels some fruit trees. So there may be some cider projects on the horizon or some multi-fruit things that we play with. I know Raj is very into those types of wines and really excited about those types of things. So I'm hoping that maybe in the future we can develop something like that. But for the short term, I think it's mostly refining what we're currently doing, continuing to stay, light on our feet and, adapting to a changing climate and adapting to any challenges that come our way.
So tell me about the Oregon wine industry a little bit. Tell me about the changes you've seen in the industry, from when you kind of first saw it to now, and kind of what it looks like to you right now. What does the industry look like in 2023?
I see when I was first, so Aaron Lieberman had sent me an article that was basically stating there's a direct correlation between quantifiable pigment and tannin concentration in wine and what a consumer is willing to pay for it. And I think a lot of people read that article and kind of decided that, okay, we pick up color and we pick up tannin, we can demand more price for a bottle. I'm seeing kind of maybe a pullback from that, I think, right now. I think the Valley is kind of going more into an elegant direction, which I personally am really interested in. I think there's a lot of young, fresh people in the industry here that are bringing new perspectives and have traveled and worked harvests all over the world and are bringing a lot of interesting perspective. I think there's a really big natural wine kick right now that I think might pull back a little bit, because I think there's a lot of maybe not so great wines that are like demanding really high bottle prices that I don't think that'll last forever. And I see Chardonnay really coming in strong to this valley. I think there are producers out there that are making exceptional Chardonnay, and I think it's gonna become, Pinot will always be king here, but Chardonnay I think is gonna make a name for itself in the coming years. It's a special grape. It's very malleable. It's very winemaker friendly. And I think people are learning how to farm it. People are learning how to work with it. And I think there's a bright future for Chardonnay here. And then there's a lot of very cool vineyards planting very cool varieties. So I see it, I'm hoping that continues, that trend continues, where we are more open to planting different varietals around here, because I think there's a ton of varieties that can adapt to this climate and be very successful.
What about for you personally? Anything on the horizon for yourself that you're looking forward to inside of wine or out? In the coming years, I would like to develop a label with my partner. I think we've been chatting about that. Small label. I don't know if it's probably more crazy than smart at this point, but all great ideas are when they start.
Right, exactly. I think I've heard Sashi say that you'd have to be crazy at this point to get into this business, but he's also said that, young people are reckless, and that's you kind of need that in order to do anything special. So I think we would like to develop a label at some point, and but in the short term, I'm just trying to stay hungry for information and knowledge, and continue to chat with my peers here in the Willamette Valley. And I want to, I've been very focused on cellar and learning winemaking and trying to become very competent in winemaking, that I haven't had as much time in the vineyard. I would personally like to start exploring viticulture much more and have a much deeper understanding of growing grapes and vineyard management and things of that sort. And I mean, I have such an incredible team here with Jessica Cortell and Daniel Lopez and the team here that's been here forever at Seven Springs, that they have a tremendous amount of knowledge that I'm just trying to get out here as much as I can to pick their brains and glean what I can.
Last question for you. What are you proudest of so far in your kind of wine accomplishments?
Really, I don't look at any particular wine and go like, wow, that was a great achievement, but I think primarily it's like the friends that you make during harvest and with all the people that you work with from around the world, like those are really special and I think will last the test of time. I'm of course very proud of the wines and some of the things I've been able to do with Evening Land and Iris and traveling, but I mean, it's very special to meet people from all over the world and kind of forge that relationship through thick and thin. And harvest is a grind. So when you can get somebody to be motivated to come work for you for your wine and like be excited about what you're doing and then leave and not taste it for another 2 years or something like that, like that's special. That's an achievement, and those friendships will last forever. So I think that's kind of one of the main things that I think I look back on and I'm like, that's the coolest thing that's happened here is you make a lot of cool friends, good people.
That's a perfect answer. All the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you'd like to cover?
No, I think I've probably blabbered enough. If your listeners are still listening at this point, they're probably topping or doing inventory or taxes or something.
Driving to Walla Walla or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's everything.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, sharing your stories with us, sharing your perspectives with us on this gorgeous day on the eve of bud break here in the valley, and we'll let you off the hook.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.